Hello everyone, I'm Carthu, and today we'll be discussing how time travel in Dragon Ball makes no sense. My last video discussing the age of future Trunks sparked a lot of conversation about time travel, the time machine, and the recharge or refuel time of said time machine. I want to clear up my opinions on the subject, as well as cover all the things we see in the series regarding time travel. Let's get into it. I'm going to cover this in chronological order as to allow you to see the order in which decisions are made regarding time travel in Dragon Ball, allowing a better understanding of when retcons could possibly take place. With that being said, let's get into it. The series introduces us to the concept of time travel when future Trunks talks with Goku in Chapter 334 of Dragon Ball, titled The Boy from the Future, initially released on July 23rd of 1991, 5 years to the date before I was actually born. This chapter tells us that Trunks has traveled to the past from 20 years in the future. We know that Goku returns to Earth in age 764 based on every statement of time skips since the beginning of the series. For more details on that, check out my Dragon Ball Timeline Explained video. So this means that Trunks is from age 784. This has to be a year after Trunks has his final encounter with the androids, as that happens 3 years after future Gohan's death in age 780, which is sensible considering future Trunks barely survived that final fight. All of this is fine, but it's our next chapter regarding time travel that causes issues. The next chapter regarding time travel and dates is Dragon Ball Chapter 358, called The Time Machine, which was released on January 28th of 1992. This is where we find out about a second time machine that came to the past from age 788, and Trunks says that that is 3 years after he had initially left. This would mean that Trunks returned to the present in age 785, and implies that the time machine only needed about a year to refill its fuel tank. Notably, at this point in the series, the time machine is said to charge rather than use fuel. However, for the sake of consistency, we'll be assuming they mean refueling. Trunks also says that this second time machine arrived a full year before he defeated Frieza, meaning it went from age 788 to age 763. This, while all fine on its own, starts to be contradicted rather quickly. The next chapter that is important to us is Dragon Ball Chapter 363, titled A Farewell to Arms, and it was released on March 3rd of 1992. In this chapter, we see the Super Namekian Piccolo tricking Cell into divulging information as to who it is, what it wants, and where it came from. Cell's first remark about time is that he won't be complete for another 24 years. Since we are currently in age 767 now, that means he won't be complete until age 791. You should see the immediate issue. If Cell was able to come back in age 788, how is he not complete until age 791? It just doesn't make any sense. However, it gets much worse than that. Cell actually says he came to the past 3 years ago, but we know that Trunks already said the time machine came back 4 years ago. So now we have a Cell that says he left the future at earliest in age 791 and arrived in the main timeline in age 764. Then we have Trunks who says Cell came from age 788 and arrived in the main timeline in age 763. Now you could put all this down to Cell not knowing dates. However, that would mean that future Trunks had, for some reason, set the time machine to age 763, a year before Frieza and a year before his first trip to the past. Why would Trunks travel so far back in time? That is another unanswered question. It could be argued, and I think rightly so, that this chapter that happens after the time machine would be retconning what Toriyama could have seen as an inconsistency in his story. The newest piece of media should supersede any previous, and I don't think that's an uncommon view. Then we get to the next chapter, Dragon Ball 364, titled Cell Laughs Last, released March 10th of 1992. This chapter isn't an issue from a date perspective, but rather a general timeline issue. The weirdest thing in this chapter is the fact that Cell says he's surprised to find out that Goku and Vegeta are still alive in this timeline, despite saying in the last chapter that he came from a timeline where Trunks killed Frieza and King Cold. This would mean that the reality Cell is from somehow has everyone die to the androids and Goku dying to the heart virus, despite Trunks going back in time to warn the Z Fighters and give Goku the medicine, which is just overall very strange and highly unlikely, especially considering that it would also mean that Trunks and Bulma built the time machine and used it again in that timeline, despite knowing that Trunks already came to the past the first time. Very strange, but this isn't date related like the previous issues, so I'm gonna keep it at that for now. Our next important chapter for covering time travel and the issues created by it is none other than the special chapter titled Trunks: The Story, which was released in August 11th of 1992. In this chapter, we have the most interesting line that is used very often when discussing the refueling of the time machine. The fact that Bulma says it takes 8 months to charge for a two-way trip. This would be pretty damning for any speculation regarding a longer recharge time if she wasn't so unsure. She literally says she can't test it and is only pretty sure that it'll make it both ways. Considering the fact that it's another year before Trunks is well enough to travel back in time and the time machine still only had enough fuel to travel both ways, as Trunks makes clear by saying he'd need to refill it to return to the past, it seems that 8 months was too short of a time in reality. This is where we get the 3-year time gap between the death of Gohan and the final encounter between Trunks and the androids before he goes to the past. Also, when using this manga chapter as your evidence for the refuel time, let me tell you that Bulma says she's sending Trunks 17 years into the past, despite him saying he went back 20 years in his initial meeting with Goku, and since this is the year before he goes to the past, Bulma should actually be saying 19 years. This special chapter has more issues besides the fact that the time travel makes no sense, but we'll save that discussion for another time. Almost a year later in the real world, we get Dragon Ball manga chapter 419, titled The Other Outcome, which was released on the 20th of April in 1993. This chapter is the epilogue to the Cell arc, which shows how Trunks went on to save his own timeline from the androids and Cell. Notably, this chapter says that in a world where the androids are defeated and peace is restored, it still takes the time machine 3 years to be refueled and recharged. So, somehow the time machine can be refueled for a round trip in a year and 8 months originally, but now it takes 3 years. If we use the 3-year number, we actually get ages closer to what Cell was saying in chapter 363. Trunks would be heading back to the present in age 790, which makes it more conceivable that Cell awoke a year early rather than 3 years early to attack him while he got in. I use this recharge time in my Trunks' age video because it actually is more consistent with what happens in Dragon Ball Super, and this recharge time is the latest stated in the original story. In Dragon Ball Super, we are told that Trunks travels 17 years into the past, more than likely a callback to the number stated in the special chapter, despite that number making really no sense. Then, Trunks tells present Bulma that it took a year to get half a trip's worth of fuel for the time machine, and is completely shocked that they can make a full tank in 1 day in the present. This would imply heavily that a full tank of fuel would at quickest take 2 years in the future. This is because if fuel took any quicker to make earlier in Trunks' timeline, he would compare that time to the 1 day, as the 1 day is still far faster. Let me quickly say, even with the change to the fuel generation time, Toyotaro's time travel explanation is quite bad and wrong overall. I discussed this briefly in my future Trunks age video, but I'll go into more depth here. To start, The time machine shouldn't be linked to 17 years in the future, as Trunks went from 20 years in the future to 20 years in the past the first time. Even if you disagree with my refuel time, that fact doesn't change. Second, Trunks went back in time to tell the Z-Fighters that he succeeded in killing the androids. As stated by Cell, that should be the same year he warned them, for some reason. And as far as we know, he would have went back to the same timeline. This is slightly more speculation than anything, but it seems to hold up. Even if he went back to a later date, it still wouldn't be a 17-year difference. This is because 3 years passed when refueling the time machine, and Gohan says he hasn't seen Trunks since the defeat of Cell when they meet again in Dragon Ball Super. So, Trunks couldn't have visited any later portion of the timeline than that. This would again negate the arbitrary rule stated by Bulma. Just like I said in my future Trunks age video, ignore Bulma as having an uneducated opinion on the topic of time travel, as it's still new to her. I only wanted to cover the time machine's time travel here so we could save things like the time rings, Hit's abilities, and Whis' abilities for another video. Make sure you subscribe to see that. Thanks for watching. Make sure to hit the like button, leave your opinions and counterpoints in the comments down below, and hit subscribe and the notification bell. That way you get to stay up to date on the channel and everything that goes on with it. If you're interested, please check out the merch store to support the channel in another way that gives you something in return. But till next time, peace!